Senator Joyal.
Chair, I would like to ask a question to Professor Howe on party financing. The bill contains a provision allowing a party to solicitate former donors and not, I should say, count the expenses of that initiative during, the election campaign. What is your assessment of that proposals of the bill?
I would agree with, I guess, some of the criticisms that we've heard voiced about that provision, that it would be difficult to separate out the fundraising component of that from the campaigning component that might be involved. Certainly one can see how it could represent a major fundraising opportunity for parties to be able to do this, because they could dedicate, if they have significant additional funds to put towards that cause, they certainly could raise very large amounts of money during campaigns. One can see the motivation behind it. However, I don't think it's a reasonable provision myself.
Do you think that the limit that the Act contains in terms of party contribution is high enough or too low, or could be increased without jeopardizing the objective of balance that the system tries to achieve?
Sorry, are you referring to the $1,500 proposed maximum donation?
Yes, because
No,
I heard you commenting on the limit that on the new legislation in Quebec limiting contribution to $100. So it seems to me that from 15 to 100, the margin is high in terms of, I should say, establishing capacity for individual citizens to contribute to a cause for which they believe there is a strong value, social value.
Well, that is true. However, I would express the concern that, I mean, somebody can have a strongly felt viewpoint they wish to express through donating money, but of course a major part of their ability to do so is driven by their income level. And somebody who's earning $30,000 a year can't possibly think about donating $1,500 to a political party. They might make a donation of $20 or $30. And therefore, I think that a $100 limit is actually much more reasonable, because that means many people can express their views by donating money, but it's a more equal or level playing field if everybody's capped at a maximum of $100. I might also add that we did have a system which is being phased out, which provided for a subsidy given for each vote in a federal election, and that was a much more equal system in the sense that every single voter would thereby be contributing in effect to a political party of their choice through their vote. Regardless of income, everybody would be making an identical contribution. Now that that part of the system is being phased out, I do think we have to look at the donation side of things and ask if it's perhaps has some inequalities in it by virtue of, as I say, wealthier Canadians dominating the system to a significant degree.
Thank you.
Senator McIntyre.
Thank you, Dr. Beange, for your presentation. In your report, you mentioned that the Chief Electoral Officer will not only keep his long term of office, but will retain many other powers, such as the Chair of Election Canada's Advisory Committee of Political Parties. As I understand, this committee has been in operation for several years, 1997, if I'm not mistaken. It meets once a year. It's made up of the CEO and 2 representatives from each registered political party. The role of the committee is to ensure that the views of represented parties are taken into account in the management of electoral law. C-14 would now create this committee on a statutory basis. However, I note that under C-14, the advice and recommendation of the committee would not be binding on the CEO. Elections Canada would have the final word. And my question to you is this: in light of the fact that the advice of the committee is not binding, do you see the need for the creation of such a committee on a statutory basis? Or should we just keep things the way they are? What are your thoughts and views on this?
That is something I haven't given a great deal of, paid a great deal of attention to. First of all, I would like to say that whoever chairs a committee steers the horse.
Yes,
Okay?
well said.
Steers the horse. So in that sense, the chief electoral officer, again, the position, not the person, maintains control. I don't think that I would advise in either of the situations, whether the current situation or the change was put through, that such changes would be mandatory. I am a little reluctant to tie that kind of behavior and make it mandatory. So I would still recommend that it would be optional.
There's no question that the committee acts as a safeguard for the arm's length administration of elections.
Absolutely.
You agree with that, yes?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Howe, do you wish to add?
No, not on that particular point. I don't have much expertise in that area.
Okay, fine. Thank you, Chair.
Senator Moore. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for being here. Dr. Beange, you, in your statement, you said that the office of Chief Electoral Officer is perhaps the single most influential position in the entire Canadian civil service. Pronouncements by him or her carry enormous weight. In consideration of that, and the young man who was here before us earlier today,
Mr.
Taylor Gunn, and the role that existed, or still exists, depending on whether or not this bill passes, says that the Chief Electoral Officer may implement public education and information programs to make the electoral process better known to the public. It goes on. So I'd like to know, and maybe both of you could, because Professor Howe, you touched on the need for education and making youth more aware of the process. So do either of you have any comments about whether or not the Chief Electoral Officer should retain his authority and mandate to educate the youth and others in our community about the process and about the importance of involving themselves in casting a ballot?
Yeah, I would like to speak to that. Certainly, the chief electoral officers call it education in terms of where to vote and so on are very important. There is no, but I would not necessarily call that voter education. I don't mean to split hairs, but I think that's election education. Voter education, I think, is something that can be undertaken by political parties and by the not-for-profit agencies. I don't think necessarily that the chief electoral officer needs to, quote, lead in that. Unfortunately, and I say this with regret, all of the programs undertaken to date have not done much. So I question whether on an evidence basis there's reason to continue. Perhaps this is a time to reconsider and think, perhaps we should let this go for 5 years and review at the end of 5 years, see what happens, because there's, again, sadly, little to show. What I find in my own university courses, when I ask students why they aren't voting, they initially say, oh, it's not interesting, and when we get right down to it, that's a more socially acceptable answer than I kind of felt lazy, which is what they end up saying. And a second probing question that I have asked is, well, if I look at the statistics, at least a third more of you are going to be voting by the time you're 29. What do you think is going to make you vote by the time you're 29? And they all say, a real job. So I am not sure that government and state efforts to increase voter turnout are necessarily going to show the fruit that we would like to see. It perhaps is a time for experimentation, since Elections Canada has had it under its wing for so many years.
So you don't think that the efforts and the results of Mr. Gunn and his civics organization have been beneficial or worth continuing?
Oh, no, I think that's precisely the kind that are worthy of experimentation. Samara Canada does similar activities. In the U.S., there's a host of civil society organizations that work on voter education and so on. One of the, I think, problems in Canada is that there is so little civic education at the high school level. In my studies at the graduate level, that tips the scale, maybe a couple of percentage points in youth voter turnout, but generally speaking, and I think you heard this yesterday, or may have heard it already, youth voting tends to depend on parental and family influence and dinner table conversations. That's the primary driver that has been shown over and over again.
I thought that his intervention with regard to the assistance from Elections Canada in terms of funding for sure, and the provision of authentic materials so
Yes.
that the youth have a real sense of, participating in a bona fide election.
Yes.
I thought that was important, but you don't think that should continue?
It is important, but I'm not sure how many dollars should be, whether the current number of dollars, which I'm not even aware of, necessarily needs to go into that.
Okay. Professor Howe?
I would take entirely the opposite view. I believe that these initiatives are very important, the educational component. Now, I'm not suggesting Elections Canada should necessarily do this directly. The Student Vote project is one where it does it indirectly. It provides the funding, and the program is carried out by an arm's length group. I believe it's actually quite difficult to say what the impact of student vote has been. I think Taylor Gunn alluded to that. I would say that what we've seen in youth voter turnout over the last 10 years or so is a leveling out, and it had actually been declining quite consistently for a good number of years. I'd also say we've had certain forces perhaps tending to push turnout down over the past 10 years or so. We've had quite an acrimonious political environment. We've had a lot of negative advertising occurring, and attack ads which can drive turnout down. So there are certain things that might be tending to drive turnout down, and yet we've managed to at least stabilize things. And I just don't think that these initiatives will take place at the same level if we don't have somebody leading the way, as I say, somebody drawing public attention to this issue of low voter turnout among young Canadians, and encouraging various organizations and groups, including parents, to help make a change to that. I mean, Elections Canada can promote the idea, for example, to parents through its advertising. It's important to get your children involved. Your children who are just turning 18, why not bring them to the polls this time? I could imagine a campaign along those lines. I don't think, obviously this occurs independently to a lot of parents, but I don't think it can hurt at all to have the elections agency promoting the idea. I believe that could help by a significant degree.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.